You know, there's this specific kind of silence that happens right after a really loud noise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when a concert ends and the amps just cut out, or, and this is where we're going today, when a massive political movement just stops,
It hits a wall.
hits a wall. And that is exactly where we are sitting right now with the WNBA.
That is a very specific, almost eerie kind of silence. It's the sound of momentum just evaporating.
And if you were online at all recently or just, existing in the world, the buzz around the league was deafening. I mean, it was a cultural tidal wave.
Absolutely.
Ratings were through the roof. Everyone had an opinion. The stars were practically household gods. And then the strike happened, and it felt like the inevitable climax of the movie.
The David and Goliath moment. The setup was perfect.
Exactly. But then, well, Goliath didn't even blink. The strike didn't just end. It collapsed.
So fast.
And it happened so quickly that I think a lot of people are still asking, wait, what actually happened? So today we're going to answer that. We've got this stack of reports on economic leverage and the collapse of the WNBA strike. And our mission here is to figure out how something so loud could end up having so little, quiet power.
It's a fascinating, if a bit brutal, case study. Because what we're really talking about today isn't just basketball. We're talking about the difference between cultural influence and economic leverage.
Okay.
And as we're going to see, those are two very, very different currencies.
Cultural influence versus economic leverage. I like that. I like that distinction because it really felt like the players had all the influence in the world. So let's dive in. To understand the collapse, I think we have to understand the optimism first. Why did the players think this was the moment to pull the emergency brake?
Well, you just have to look at the landscape over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
The players' assumption, it was rooted entirely in visibility. For decades, the argument against paying WNBA players more was just simple math. Nobody watches, nobody cares. You couldn't argue with the ledger. But suddenly, well, everybody was watching.
That nobody watches argument was dead.
Buried.
Buried.
Precisely. So the union logic was, the iron is hot. The networks need this content. The sponsors need this demographic. If we stop the product now, the cost to the owners would be too high to ignore. They have to pay up.
It's the classic strike while the iron is hot strategy. But before we get to why it failed so spectacularly, we need to unpack what they were actually asking for.
Yeah.
Because I saw the headlines about more money. But looking at these reports, the actual demands were much more structural than just give us a raise.
Oh, it was way more nuanced.
Yeah.
Sure, the headline screams salary, but the breakdown of the ask is really interesting because it shows where the pain points actually are.
Okay.
First, they weren't just fighting for the superstars. A huge priority was the, let's call it the middle class of the league, the bench players.
Right, because we focus on the face on the cereal box or the MVP, but the player at the end of the bench player, number 11 or 12, they're living a very, very different life.
Completely different. I mean, we're talking about professional athletes who might make less than a mid-level manager at a tech company.
Wow.
The union wanted to raise the floor, the base salary, so that you don't have professional athletes working side hustles just to pay rent in the city they play in. They wanted to professionalize the entire roster, not just the starting five.
Which seems basic for a major league. If you're in the top tier of your sport in the world, you probably shouldn't be driving for Uber in the off-season.
You'd think so.
And speaking of professionalization, there was the travel issue. Charter flights. Now, I feel like every time this comes up, some pundit says, oh, they want private jets and champagne.
Which drives me crazy because the source material is so clear on this. This isn't about luxury. It's about physiology.
Explain that.
You cannot play a physical 40-minute professional basketball game, get banged up, and then fold your 6'4" frame into a middle seat in economy class. Then you fly 4 hours, sit on a tarmac, and somehow expect to perform at an elite level the next day. It's a health issue. It's a recovery issue.
It's protecting the asset. If the players are the product, you don't ship the product via some budget courier. You don't put a racehorse in a Honda Civic.
Exactly. So that was on the table. But the biggest swing, the one that really scared the owners, was the revenue sharing model.
This is the bet on yourself clause, right?
Essentially. In simple terms, the players wanted their income tied directly to the broadcast rights. So if the TV deal doubles, player salaries should reflect that. They wanted a guaranteed percentage of the upside.
Which is standard in the NBA or the NFL. You get a piece of the pie.
Right. But the owners hate this in a growing league because they want to pay fixed costs while they capture all the growth. If the league explodes in value, the owners want to keep that profit margin, not hand it over to the workforce.
So the players put all this on the table, salary floors, charters, revenue sharing, and they were confident that their new popularity gave them the power to demand it.
They were very confident.
And this is where the record scratches. Because the owners just waited. They didn't panic. They didn't fold. Why? How do you stare down a cultural phenomenon and just yawn?
Because of a concept called the mismatch in staying power. This is where the economics get really cold and impersonal.
Okay.
To win a strike, you don't need to be right. You need to be able to survive not getting paid longer than your boss can survive not having workers.
It's a holding your breath contest.
Yeah.
And you have to know how big your lungs are compared to the other guys.
And the WNBA players, unfortunately, have a very small oxygen tank. We have to talk about the overseas factor.
Okay.
This is unique to women's basketball, and it is critical to this collapse. It's something that just doesn't exist in the NFL or MLB.
Walk us through this, because in the NBA, LeBron James isn't going to play in Italy during the offseason to pay his mortgage. He's filming movies or resting.
No. But for a huge chunk of the WNBA, the offseason is actually their real job. It's a strange economic reality where the WNBA gives them the fame, but overseas leagues give them the fortune.
For sure.
Many players make significantly more money playing in Turkey or China or Spain than they do in the U.S.
Okay, so how does a strike here mess that up? If they aren't playing in the WNBA, doesn't that just leave them free to go overseas?
It's about the calendar. If a strike drags on, it pushes the WNBA season back. It delays the playoffs. Suddenly, the WNBA season is overlapping with the start of the European season. So if you're a player, you are now risking your primary income source, that contract in Europe, to fight for better wages at your secondary income source.
Oh, wow. So striking literally endangers their real paycheck. That is a massive leverage killer. You're asking them to burn the candle at both ends.
It splits the union immediately. You have players thinking, I support the cause, but I have a contract in Istanbul starting in October, and I cannot miss that flight or I lose $200,000.
Meanwhile, what are the owners doing? I mean, they're losing money if games aren't played, right? They still have to pay for arenas, staff.
Yeah.
It's not free for them to stop.
It's not free, no, but they are insulated in a way the players just aren't. This brings us to the concept of bundling.
Bundling.
Like my cable package.
Very similar. The reports highlight that a lot of WNBA broadcast deals and sponsorships are bundled with the NBA. It's a package deal.
Okay.
So if the WNBA goes dark for a month, the network doesn't necessarily cancel the check because the NBA machine is still churning out content.
So the WNBA is like the extra channel you get for free.
Yep.
If it goes dark, you don't cancel your subscription because you still want the main channels.
That's a harsh way to put it, but economically, yeah. The owners knew that the networks weren't going to sue them immediately. They had a financial cushion. They could sit back, maybe take a small loss, and just wait.
While the players had savings accounts that were draining by the day.
So the owners calculated correctly, it turns out, that the players would run out of cash before the owners ran out of patience. That is the definition of leverage. It's about capital reserves. It's not about morality.
Not at all.
But wait, I have to push back on this a bit. What about the fans? We talked about this cultural tidal wave. I mean, Twitter was on fire. The hashtags, the viral threads, the outrage. Doesn't that count for something? If millions of people are screaming at the owners, doesn't that create pressure?
This is maybe the most painful lesson from the reports, and it's one that applies to a lot of modern activism. It's the illusion of support.
The illusion of support.
We confuse noise with action.
Explain that, because it felt like a lot of action.
The source calls it silent economics. See, you can tweet, pay the players all day long. But let's look at the behavior. Did season ticket holders cancel in droves?
No.
Did people stop buying merchandise?
No.
And crucially, did the sponsors pull their ads?
I didn't see any big brands dropping out.
No, exactly. Nike, State Farm, the big networks, they didn't pull their millions. They put out these statements saying they support the athletes, but they kept the checks clearing to the league.
So outrage is free, but boycotts are hard.
Exactly. Modern labor movements often fail at this specific hurdle, converting social media likes into actual economic pain. The owners looked at the balance sheet and saw that despite the PR nightmare, the money was still safe.
So they had a PR problem, sure, but they didn't have a business problem.
And you can survive a PR problem. You just ride it out. You wait for the next scandal to take over the timeline.
You just wait for the news cycle to move on.
Which it always does.
This leads us right to the fractured alliances section of this deep dive. Because if the players couldn't do it alone and the fans weren't hurting the bottom line, where were the allies? I'm thinking specifically about the big brother here, the NBA.
The silence from the NBA side was loud.
I mean, they are historically linked. The NBA subsidized the WNBA for years. Why didn't the NBA players step in? The MBTA is a powerful union.
It's complicated. The NBA Players Association has its own battles coming up.
Yeah.
And the source suggests there was a reluctance to spend their political capital on a different league's fight. There wasn't a sense of shared destiny. They viewed it as a separate house.
So no cavalry coming over the hill.
No cavalry. And then you have the internal fractures we touched on earlier, the stars versus the rest.
All right, the inequality of sacrifice. This is the locker room drama.
Think about it. A superstar, let's call it a player A, has $1 million shoe deal, commercials, endorsements. She can afford to not get a WNBA paycheck for 6 months. She'll be fine. She can wait.
She has a war chest. She can live off the sneaker money.
Exactly. Now look at player B. She's a rookie or bench player. She makes $70,000 a year. No endorsements. She pays rent, car payments, maybe supports her family. She cannot miss 2 paychecks.
So when the union meets to vote on continuing the strike, player A says, hold the line, we can win this. And player B is thinking, I can't pay my rent next week.
And that is where the union breaks. You can't have a unified strike if half your membership is terrified of eviction. The owners saw those cracks forming immediately. They knew that if they just waited, the rookies and the rank and file would force the stars to settle.
Which brings us to the pivot. The moment the strike went from, we are going to shut this down, to something else. The report calls it the symbolic mistake.
This is fascinating game theory. When the economic pressure failed, the players tried to reframe the narrative. They started saying things like, we are striking to send a message. They called it a symbolic action.
To me, that sounds noble. It sounds like a moral victory. We are standing up for what's right.
In the negotiation room, symbolic is a synonym for surrender.
Ouch. That is harsh.
It really is. When you tell your opponent that your action is symbolic, you are admitting that you know you can't hurt them. You are signaling weakness. You're essentially saying, we know we can't win the money, so we'll settle for the moral high ground.
And the owners, being cold economic operators, just swept the chips off the table.
Immediately. Once that signal was sent, all the leverage was gone. Negotiations restarted, but the dynamic had shifted completely. The owners knew they had won, they offered peanuts, and the union, well, they had to take them.
So let's do the autopsy. What did they actually walk away with? Did they get anything?
They got meager gains, some minor bumps in the salary cap, some adjustments to travel policies, but not the guarantee of charters they wanted. It was all watered down.
And the big stuff, the revenue sharing.
Gone. No revenue sharing model, no significant structural change to the overseas conflict. They basically returned to work with a slightly better version of the old contract.
That is incredibly deflating. It really highlights that narrative check the source talks about. Just because you are on the cover of Time magazine doesn't mean you can rewrite the contract.
It exposes the limits of the growth narrative. We like to think that popularity solves everything. If we just get people to watch, the equity will follow. This proves that structural economics are stubborn things. You can't pay your bills with buzz.
Okay, this has been pretty heavy and, frankly, a bit depressing for anyone who is rooting for the players. Is there any silver lining here? Or was this just a total loss?
The source argues it's not a total loss, but rather a tuition payment, a very expensive lesson.
What's the lesson? What did they buy with all that pain?
It lays the groundwork. They started a national conversation that actually educated the fans on why the pay gap exists. People now understand the bundling and the overseas issues in a way they didn't before. The mechanics of the league are transparent now.
So the fans are smarter. They know it's not just greedy owners, but a complex system.
And specifically, the younger audience, Gen Z, they responded heavily to the labor narrative. Sponsors are looking at that. They realize that in 5 or 10 years, that demographic is going to be the main spending power. And if those fans demand equity, the sponsors might actually have to move next time.
Okay, so if we are looking at round 2, because there's always a next time, what's the playbook? The report outlines a strategic reconstruction. If they want to win next time, what do they need?
First and foremost, a war chest.
Real money.
Serious, liquid capital. The union cannot go into a strike living paycheck to paycheck. They need to spend the next 5 years building a strike fund that can pay every single player, from the MVP to the last bench player, a living wage for an entire season.
You can't fight capital without capital.
Exactly. If the owners know you have enough money to sit out for a year, suddenly they're the ones sweating. The waiting game doesn't work if the players can wait just as long.
What else?
Recruitment of genuine allies,
Yeah.
not just retweets. They need corporate partners who are willing to put labor clauses in their contracts. Imagine if a major sponsor had a clause saying, if there's a work stoppage due to unfair labor practices, we have the right to withhold payment to the league.
Wow. That would weaponize the sponsors. That's a game changer. That turns the silent economics into loud economics.
It's aggressive, but that's what leverage looks like. And finally, unity. They have to solve the internal inequality. The stars might have to subsidize the bench during a strike.
That's a big ask, asking the millionaires to pay the salaries of the rookies.
It is. But solidarity has to be more than a hashtag. If the unit isn't financially sealed tight, the owners will always find the crack and just pry it open.
It really challenges the way we think about these sports moments. We want to believe in the movie version, where the impassioned speech changes everything, where the moral weight of the cause bends the arc of the universe.
But in the boardroom, gravity still works. The owners kept their model because the players literally couldn't afford to break it. Economics ruled the day.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. We've seen that being right and being loud just wasn't enough.
It wasn't even close.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with. If cultural momentum doesn't pay the bills during a strike, does the current model of sports activism need to be completely rethought? We see players focusing so much on public opinion, on winning the hearts of the fans, but maybe that's the wrong battlefield.
It's a provocative idea. Where should they be fighting?
Well, are we moving toward a world where players need to stop trying to be influencers and start trying to be investment bankers? Do they need to stop asking for a slice of the pie and start building their own bakery? Maybe the next revolution isn't televised. Maybe it's financed.
That's a very powerful thought. If you own the capital, you don't have to strike against it.
Something to think about. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one.